With pro-democracy forces now wide awake and surging in terms of their numbers and courage, dug in on one side, and Donald Trump with his band of autocratic enablers on the other, the country in some ways feels like it's engaged in a game of chicken, waiting to see which side's going to blink first. A stare down, if you will, where the stakes are nothing less than the future of American democracy. Today, though, following the fatal shootings of two people in Minneapolis at the hands of federal immigration officers, and subsequently the breathtaking durability and scope of protests from ordinary citizens braving the bitter cold to protect their neighbors, hitting the pavement in protest all across our country day after day, it is the Trump side doing the blinking. Now, why could that be? Well, because the gears of democracy, cobwebs and all, are finally creaking back into action on three separate but important fronts today. First, in state houses from coast to coast, New York Times reports this, quote, ever since the second Trump administration embarked on its large-scale deportation efforts, Democratic-leaning states have proposed and passed, in some instances, countermeasures, such as banning masked or unidentified law enforcement officers. Last month, a dozen legislators from 7 states announced that they would coordinate legislation in 2026 to complement the litigation already being used by Democratic attorneys general to challenge immigration policies. But after the killings of both Mr. Pretti and Renee Good, a resident...
This just happened. We are looking at a specific moment in time where the political ground in Washington has shifted in a way that we have not seen in decades. Following a series of fatal events in Minneapolis involving federal agents, the dynamic of power in the Capitol has fundamentally changed. We are no longer watching a standard partisan battle. We are watching the beginning of an internal rupture within the ruling party that could threaten the stability of the current administration. The trigger for this shift was the confirmed death of 2 American citizens during an immigration enforcement operation. This event has forced a reaction that political analysts did not predict would happen this quickly. The wall of total support that has protected the presidency for years is showing visible structural failure. We are seeing high-ranking members of the president's own party breaking ranks, demanding answers, and setting the stage for investigations. This is not just a disagreement over policy. This is an institutional fight for survival. The stakes right now are the collapse of party unity and a potential constitutional crisis as the legislative branch attempts to rein in the executive branch. To understand why this moment is so dangerous for the administration, we have to look at the landscape right now. For a long time, it felt like the country was locked in a game of chicken. You had pro-democracy forces on one side, waking up and surging in numbers. On the other side, you had Donald Trump and his circle of enablers. Both sides were staring each other down, waiting to see who would blink first. The stakes of this standoff were nothing less than the future of the system itself. But today, that dynamic broke.
Animating that urgency happens to be the second of those 3 fronts we talked about. That is us, the American people at large, in growing numbers, because voters right now are making it abundantly clear that they are not interested in waiting the 9 months between now and the midterms. They're using their feet, they're using their body. They're putting Donald Trump and the Republicans on notice that they do not approve of what they're doing, especially the extreme immigration measures being carried out against human beings, including American citizens, in the name of the American people. Tomorrow at this time, it's possible, it is likely that we could be covering widespread protests, and possibly there's some talk that we could also be covering some general strikes in some parts of the country. There's a third front, our justice system. Just in the last 24 hours, judges in separate cases have acted decisively to try to rein in the seeming impunity of Donald Trump's immigration policies and authorities. In one instance, a federal judge in Minnesota ordered the government to cease detaining and deporting refugees who were lawful.
It was the Trump side that blinked. This happened because of the fallout from Minneapolis. After federal immigration officers shot and killed 2 people, the public response was immediate and overwhelming. Ordinary citizens braved bitter cold temperatures to protect their neighbors. They hit the pavement day after day. This durability of protest forced the gears of democracy to start turning again. We are seeing this happen on 3 separate fronts. The first front is in the state houses. Reports from the New York Times indicate that ever since the administration began its large-scale deportation efforts, Democratic-leaning states have been passing countermeasures. They are banning masked or unidentified law enforcement officers. Legislators from 7 different states announced they would coordinate new laws in 2026 to challenge these immigration policies. That was expected. But what nobody saw coming was the reaction from Republicans. This is the second and most critical front. After the killings of Mr. Pai and Renee Good, a resident of Minneapolis, GOP lawmakers began to turn. It is not all of them, and it is not even most of them yet. But it is enough of them to matter. It is enough to make the situation dangerous for the president. We are talking about Republican lawmakers who spent years defending everything this president did. Now they are demanding answers. They are calling for investigations. They are pushing for hearings. They are doing all of this publicly. They are angry about the tactics used in Minneapolis and the killings by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Even members of the president's own party are saying these operations went too far. This is unprecedented. Trump has never faced this kind of crack in his support before. If you think this is a minor disagreement that will just blow over, you are missing the bigger picture. The urgency is being driven by the American people. This is the third front. Voters are making it clear they are not interested in waiting months for the next election. They are using their feet and their bodies to put the administration on notice. They do not approve of extreme measures being carried out against human beings, including American citizens, in the name of the American people. There is now talk of general strikes in some parts of the country. Simultaneously, the justice system is pushing back. In just the last 24 hours, judges in separate cases have acted to rein in the impunity of immigration authorities. A federal judge in Minnesota ordered the government to stop detaining and deporting refugees who were lawfully admitted. Now, we need to be very clear about what this political shift means. This does not mean impeachment is guaranteed right now. There is no secret group of Republicans promising to vote for removal today. That is not what is happening. But what is actually happening is almost as significant. For the first time in this second term, a growing faction of Republicans is publicly breaking ranks. These are people who are supposed to be on the team. They are demanding testimony from agency chiefs. They are calling for briefings. They are questioning if the president overstepped his bounds. Some are even warning him not to invoke the Insurrection Act. These are not Democrats. These are Republicans doing this in the open. They are saying it on cable news, in committee hearings, and in official letters. This matters because the president has always relied on total loyalty. That loyalty protected him through every scandal and every controversy in the past. As long as his party stood with him, he was untouchable because the votes were not there to remove him. But after Renee Good and Pretti were killed by federal agents, that wall started to crack. We are seeing House Homeland Security members like Andrew Garbarino calling for agency chiefs to testify. Oversight Chair James Comer is demanding answers about tactics. Senator Rand Paul wants briefings. Senators John Thune and Roger Wicker are publicly urging the president not to use the military in Minneapolis. This is a party starting to question its own leader. Here is the most interesting part of this dynamic. Democrats are watching all of this happen. They have been talking about impeachment for months, but they knew they did not have the votes. They knew Republicans would never go along with it. So they waited. They built their case. They documented every overreach. Now Republicans are handing them the ammunition they need. Every time a GOP lawmaker demands an investigation into Minneapolis, it creates a record. Every time they question the tactics, it creates evidence. Every time they call the strategy an overstep, it is a soundbite Democrats can use. If the House changes hands in the midterms, those Republican concerns become the foundation for articles of impeachment. That is why this is so dangerous for Trump. We have to look at the reality of what happened in Minneapolis. This is not an abstract debate. Renee Good was a U.S. citizen shot and killed during an operation. Pretti was a 37-year-old nurse and a U.S. citizen killed by a federal agent. These were not undocumented immigrants or criminals. These were Americans. They died because the administration launched a crackdown that critics say was poorly planned and too militarized. Now even Republicans are admitting that maybe they need to pump the brakes. They are realizing they need to figure out what happened before they keep doing this. That is the context for this sudden willingness to challenge the president. It is no longer just about policy. It is about American citizens dying at the hands of federal agents. That is a line some Republicans are not willing to cross. The bottom line is that the president is not getting impeached tomorrow, but the foundation is being laid. If Republicans keep demanding answers and holding hearings, they are making it easier for Democrats to turn those questions into charges later. The president's own party is creating the roadmap for his potential impeachment, whether they realize it or not. Let us break down exactly what is happening inside the party. This is not business as usual. Republicans do not typically turn on their own president. He survived 2 previous impeachments and countless scandals because they protected him. But Minneapolis changed the calculation. The deaths of 2 citizens crossed a line. We are seeing public backlash from mainstream Republicans. These are committee chairs and senators who voted to acquit him in the past. Reuters reports that a growing number of them are pressing for a deeper investigation. They are not calling it criminal yet, but they are saying the strategy overstepped its bounds. That phrase is specific code for "you went too far." Representative Andrew Garbarino is demanding to know what orders were given. He is not buying the line that everything was done by the book. James Comer, who spent years investigating the opposition, is now turning his attention to the administration. He wants hearings and documents. He wants to know why 2 citizens are dead. On the Senate side, Rand Paul is demanding to know the legal authority for the operation. He is not satisfied with vague answers about national security. Senators Thune and Wicker publicly urged the president not to use the Insurrection Act. This is a rare moment where Republican senators are telling a Republican president not to use the military. There are 3 reasons they are breaking ranks. First, the optics are terrible. The base might support deportation, but nobody supports American citizens getting killed by federal agents. A nurse getting shot while being in the wrong place is a story that cuts through the political spin. Second, there is a realization that the operation was poorly executed. It looked like chaos. There were unclear rules of engagement and conflicting statements. The BBC and The Hill reported that Republicans are criticizing DHS Secretary Kristi Noem for premature statements. She tried to spin the narrative before the facts were out, and she turned out to be wrong. That makes Republicans nervous. Third, they are thinking about the midterms. They know Democrats will use Minneapolis against them. They need to distance themselves to survive. They need to prove they are not just rubber stamping everything. This creates a tension. They want answers, but they do not want to destroy the president's broader agenda. They are trying to thread a needle by criticizing the tactics without condemning the goal. But Democrats are taking notes. They are clipping the videos. They are saving the letters. They know that if they regain power, they will have a bipartisan record of concern to build their case on. This is the most significant backlash of the second term. It shows that the blind loyalty is eroding. Republicans are calculating their own survival. They are starting to worry about being tied to failures. Minneapolis showed them that there are limits to fear as a control mechanism. They will defend a lot, but they will not defend the killing of citizens during chaotic operations. We need to pause and analyze why this specific moment carries so much weight in the history of this administration. In politics, there is a difference between noise and a signal. What we are seeing now is a signal. For years, the operating principle of the Republican Party has been unity at all costs. The belief was that if they stuck together, they could weather any storm. That strategy worked because the pressure was always external. It came from Democrats, the media, or international critics. When the pressure is external, it is easy to circle the wagons and fight back. What makes the Minneapolis situation different is that the pressure is now internal. It is coming from inside the structure. When you have committee chairmen and senior senators publicly questioning the competency and legality of an executive action, that is a structural fracture. We have seen this dynamic before in history. If we look back at the Nixon era, the dam did not break because Democrats were angry. The dam broke when Republicans realized that defending the president was going to cost them their own careers and the viability of their party. We are seeing a similar calculation happening right now. The death of American citizens on American soil at the hands of federal agents is a distinct type of political crisis. It strips away the usual defenses. The administration cannot claim this is just about border security when the victims are citizens. They cannot claim this is about law and order when the operation itself looked like chaos. This removes the rhetorical shield that Republicans usually use to defend the president. Without that shield, they are exposed, and when politicians feel exposed, they act to protect themselves. The involvement of the Insurrection Act in the conversation is a critical indicator of how deep this fear goes. The Insurrection Act is the nuclear option of domestic power. It allows the president to deploy active-duty military troops onto American streets to enforce the law. For traditional conservatives and constitutionalists, this is a nightmare scenario. The military does not want to do it, and Congress does not want the president to do it. When Senators Thune and Wicker publicly warned the president not to invoke this act, they were drawing a hard line in the sand. They were effectively saying that they do not trust his judgment in this crisis. That is a massive statement. It implies that the people who work closest with the president are worried he is spiraling out of control. They are trying to put guardrails on him in real time out in the open because they do not think he will listen to private advice. This also reveals a shift in the balance of power. For a long time, the president held all the cards because he controlled the base. Republicans feared that one mean tweet or one primary challenge would end their careers. But Minneapolis has complicated that math. If a Republican defends an operation that killed a nurse and a resident who were citizens, they risk alienating the moderate voters they need to win general elections. The fear of the general electorate is starting to outweigh the fear of the primary electorate. That is the tipping point. We also have to look at the role of the institutions. The courts are stepping in and state legislatures are coordinating. This is the system of checks and balances waking up from a dormant state. During the first term, these institutions were often caught off guard. Now they are prepared. The coordination between 7 states to pass legislation in 2026 shows that the opposition is playing a long game. They are not just reacting, they are planning. The trap for the president is that he cannot easily dismiss these investigations as partisan witch hunts. If James Comer is asking the questions, it is not a witch hunt in the eyes of the Republican base. If Rand Paul is demanding briefings, it is not a liberal plot. By having these questions come from the right, it validates the premise that something went wrong. This strips the president of his favorite defense mechanism, which is to blame the other side. He is now in a fight with his own side. Now we have to look at where this goes from here. The consequences of these events are going to play out in both the short term and the long term. In the immediate future, we are going to see a paralyzed legislative agenda. With key Republicans demanding hearings and investigations, the bandwidth of Congress is going to be consumed by Minneapolis. The administration's plans for other policies will likely be put on hold while they scramble to do damage control. We can expect to see agency chiefs testifying under oath. This is always a dangerous moment for any administration. Under oath, officials have to be careful. They cannot spin the truth the way a press secretary can. If they admit to failures in planning or execution, those sound bites will dominate the news cycle for weeks. This will keep the story alive and keep the pressure on the president. Looking further ahead, the 2026 midterms are now the deciding factor. This is the horizon line that everyone is watching. If Democrats manage to take control of the House of Representatives, the dynamic changes instantly. The investigations that Republicans are starting now will be taken over by Democrats. But instead of just asking questions, Democrats will use the Republican-gathered evidence to draft articles of impeachment. This is the scenario that the president should be most worried about. The impeachment trap is being built right now. Republicans are constructing the frame, gathering the documents, and putting the witnesses on the record. If they hand that finished structure over to a Democratic majority, the process of impeachment becomes much faster and much harder to defend against. There is also the question of escalation. If the protests continue and the strikes expand, the president will face a choice. If he listens to the warnings and backs down, he looks weak to his base. If he ignores the warnings and invokes the Insurrection Act or doubles down on aggressive tactics, he risks a total fracture of his party. If he pushes too hard, he might force those Republicans who are currently just asking questions to actively support legislation to stop him. We are likely heading toward a messy stalemate that lasts until the election. The administration will try to stonewall Republicans, will try to get enough answers to satisfy their constituents without blowing up the party, and Democrats will wait for their turn. But the damage is already done. The perception of invincibility is gone. The idea that the party will support the president no matter what has been disproven. History tells us that once these cracks appear, they rarely seal back up. They usually widen. As more information comes out about the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretti, the justification for the operation will become harder to maintain. The president is entering the most dangerous phase of his time in office, not because of his enemies, but because his allies are finally drawing a line. The game of chicken is over, and the political crash is happening in slow motion right in front of us.